Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tech Talk with VLink podcast, brought to you by VLink Inc. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are continuing our conversation with Jag Dalal. Jag is an internationally known speaker and consultant in the field of management and technology. He has been presenting at conferences and company events on outsourcing as well as technology. Jag has held senior IT executive positions with Fortune 100 companies and was one of the founding partners of business process outsourcing service line at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He has served on IT and ITE provider advisory boards, where he guides companies with his extensive knowledge of the industry. Jag, thanks for joining us again today to continue our discussion. I know last time we spoke about the need for businesses to find and partner with an IT service provider and how this improves their IT environments. Let's start today with defining what the critical factors are in creating a successful relationship with an IT service provider.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast again and kind of share my experience and thoughts on how to really create a relationship and a partnership with a service provider that yields results. There have been many studies that have been done that says that if this relationship is not established in the right way, managed the right way, there is probably as much as 30 to 40% leakage in the value received from that relationship. That's a big loss. So when you're talking about improving your IT environment by 10, 15, 20%, but you have a leakage simply because you've not done a good job of managing that relationship right from the outset. In the outsourcing space, in the staffing space, all of this is under the guidance, under the label of governance. And in fact, I've written articles on governance. I've spoken at conferences on how to have an effective governance that creates an everlasting, fruitful, beneficial relationship for both the customer and the service provider. So the very first thing in all of this, there are two factors that I consider to be extremely important. One is a management commitment. When you enter into a relationship, it's absolutely critical that management of both sides are fully committed to that relationship.
Always.
And therefore it's critical that that relationship is established first so that as your ongoing relationship, you can continue to depend on management to serve with a common purpose, with a common objective. The second thing is what I call discipline. Establishing a relationship is not a one-time deal. No. It is a continuous process. Therefore, it requires a discipline that you continue to use the techniques, the processes, the tools that manages a relationship. Then the next thing is really understanding each other. It's critical that when you establish a relationship, make sure that both parties understand their objectives. Both parties understand their requirements. Both parties understand what they can and cannot do, because there are things that either party may choose that they are against performing or doing something. It's important to have that be known upfront so that later on it doesn't become an issue, because then there may be an expectation set on one side that the other side may not know and other side may not accept at that point in time. I call that, all of the contracts usually have the things that they will do with each other. A lot of times I kind of bring out the point that, hey, in the contract, you should also say what they will not do. Set expectations on both sides up front.
And setting them up front. I was going to say that. And communication is key. Understand, like you said, in understanding both sides, definitely a key critical factor.
And understanding that communication is a process, not a one-time deal. That is something that has to be continuous, that has to be open, and really something that both the parties understand. And that's why management commitment is critical. That's why that discipline that I talked about earlier is really absolutely critical. Last but not the least, both parties need to come together and understand what are the potential risks in that relationship. All relationships have risks based on something. And that may be natural risk, that may be the risk because of the business environment, that may be risk with the engagement objective, engagement project. Both parties should jointly understand what those risks are and then take steps to eliminate or alleviate or reduce those risks together. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, risks, the impact of the risk lies with the customer. No
Yeah.
service provider ever wants that risk to be borne by them, but also at the same time, a service provider like a VLink would say, I don't want to do something that creates a greater risk for my customer because I'm here to provide a service, not increase their risk. And
Absolutely.
and that's why it's really critical. And that's where I come back to say that in the last podcast I talked about what kind of service companies with small and medium-sized businesses should really do work with.
Hmm.
I always say, hey, this is where one of the times you want to be a big fish in a small pond
Hmm.
because then you're going to have the management commitment, you're going to have the management attention, and you're going to have the ability to have the communication and identify risks for each other so that it can be mitigated jointly.
Absolutely. Great practices, Jagged, for businesses to follow in creating that strong relationship. So important. Do you have any examples from your experience that you can share?
They actually have many, many examples, and that's why I said one of the articles that I've written talks about some of the good things that are done in governance and some of the things that have not worked well. One of the, as I said, it's important to have the relationship established. One of the best features that I've seen is in one company, what they did is that they took pictures of the people on a project team on both sides, on the customer side as well as on the provider side. Because not all times they come together. And
Yeah, right.
nowadays, you work from home and Zoom and Microsoft Meet, the team,
Yeah.
it's important to have the relationship so that you can put a face behind the name. And that's what they
Abs-
did. And they actually had a board set up with the names and pictures of the people. And not only that, they actually had some private information, personal information on it so that they can have a relationship that's established. So that was a really good practice in
yeah.
setting up that mutual relationship.
Well, it
The
makes
second
people
best,
real. Makes people real, and that's what you want to. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people,
exactly.
So
And both parties have a common objective.
absolutely.
That both parties have a desire to succeed and make each other successful. And that's critical.
Yeah.
The second best practice that I've seen is that on a monthly basis, you really have a lots of reports that are published in terms of the work completed, work to be done, etc. I think best practice I've seen is it is an open platform where
Hmm.
everybody can see exactly where you're at and where you're going so that
Hmm.
the expectation is clear on both sides at all times.
Absolutely. Transparency is always important.
Exactly. And again, coming back to my point that that's what a big fish on a small pond is more critical because then you can really see and have each other on the same page going forward.
Yeah.
So that's another really good practice that I've seen. And the last practice that I've seen is really coming together twice a year. Sometimes I've seen it as often as four times a year, but at least twice a year, come together and do a lessons learned.
Mhm. Kind of a SWOT analysis type of thing. But yeah, great. Very, very
Exactly,
insightful. Yeah.
exactly.
Thank
So that
thank
you
you.
kind of see and do something with it in terms of the lessons learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Apply them. Absolutely. And that's the most important thing, to apply lessons learned. Hindsight is always 2020 for
That's right.
sure. Again, thanks for joining us for Tech Talk with VLink today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Our time is up. I hope you enjoyed this version of Tech Talk with VLink, where we apply our intellect and efforts in engineering powerful experiences for our valued customers.